Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
Hey, you hung on that one a little long. I like that.
Yeah.
Walters, I'm doing very well. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Awesome Truth. We are back, and we are discussing a documentary today. We are actually talking about the A&E content that is being created by WWE. Well, some could call this a treasure trove. Depends on how optimistic you're feeling at that moment. But if you're unaware, A&E is just churning out wrestling WWE content these days. Just biographies, docs, just non-stop stuff. And there was a new season of a show called Biography: WWE Legends, and we wanted to cover perhaps one of these episodes, and we looked at the list of the new ones that have aired, and we said, you know what, let's not cover any of these. Let's go back in time a year and let's talk about Booker T.
Yeah, it's like, oh, A&E has announced as of March 2022 that they're going to come out with 130 hours of WWE content.
Is that the total number? Jeez.
So it's like, what's the least timely piece of content we could cover? It's like, oh, the one we're going to talk about today. Like, great. All right.
The least timely, but arguably the most interesting. Like, it's just, and I understand. I don't fault A&E for this, like, because they're not the network. They're not, they're not betrothed to previous stories that have been told 100 times over. So I'm sure they want to lay the groundwork and tell all the stories we've heard. But if you look at the new season, it's just really nothing. It's Undertaker, which God knows we've talked about Undertaker way too much. It's Goldberg. Okay, we've talked about Goldberg. It's the Bella Twins. We may return to that at a certain point. And it's Kurt Angle and Lex Luger. And like we've touched on all of these people relatively recently, minus the Bellas. So it's like, the thing I think you and I hate the most at this point in the show is just rehashing old ground over and over again.
Yeah, look. Maybe their biography. WWE A&E Legends rendition maybe covers things differently in a different way that's different than Peacock. I don't know how. I haven't done a side-by-side comparison of the two pieces of content. Maybe we should talk about the one we're doing today, Booker T. Maybe if Booker T's Chronicle is put next to the biography, like we get two very different things, or maybe we get the same thing. It's unclear, but just having done a bunch of the Peacock stuff on a lot of these guys that have been covered, it's like, God, it doesn't leave us a whole lot of options unless we want to just like be completely redundant.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like I have not watched a ton of biographies in my day, certainly not in the last 20 years. Like, it was a thing that when we were kids, like, and there were less channels. Like, okay, sometimes there's a thing you'd maybe turn to if you're incredibly bored and it was some actor you wanted to hear about. But like the biography brand is, I don't think it's particularly strong these days. Probably why they're turning to pro wrestlers for hundreds of hours of content. So maybe the biography and the Chronicle are the same thing. We'll never really know. But I think we have enough track record with Chronicles and other various network offerings that it was nice to go outside of those and see something slightly and just pursue a different type of biography, And as you mentioned, the Booker T one that we talked about, like the Booker T episode, which is available if you have cable, it's on A&E. If you have streaming cable, it's available everywhere. It's it does take pains to tell the Booker T pre-wrestling story. Booker T growing up, the hardships, his tough life as a kid, and then his eventual rise in wrestling. And I guess because maybe it's as simple as because it's an outside brand, I do appreciate that a little more here. It also helps that Booker T has a really good story. Like it's not just the same old that we've read 10 dozen times, but it's an actual hard upbringing that doesn't directly tie to wrestling. It's sort of its own little story in and of itself.
Yeah, it's similar to stories like, I'm just trying to think out loud here, but like Scott Hall, for example, where like there's like really big pivotal like hardships moments that happened before the wrestling that led to this performer's mindset going into the business, and there's more of an arc. There's more of like redemption. There's just more of a story. Like, I saw there's a Shawn Michaels episode, and having read his books, and I could probably have made the biography on Shawn Michaels, but like ultimately, like this guy didn't really have much of a story. You kind of, if you're reading a book on him, you're kind of just flipping the pages, you're absorbing the information, but you're kind of like, just get me to the part where you're wrestling, dude. Like, you grew up in Texas, your dad was in the army or something. I don't know. Like, well, the end. Like, that's 100 pages. Like, God, I wish I had that time back. But not as much as I love Shawn Michaels. But ultimately, my point, though, is like Booker T actually had something to say about his life before wrestling and was something worth exploring. And I think they did a good job of doing that. And they kept my interest for the first part of it.
Yeah, and it's not just all set up for wrestling, like the wrestling is kind of an afterthought. Like it's one of those things, he sort of was just living his life and clearly was a wrestling fan, but then one day his brother, Stevie Ray, which I also did not know, or maybe I knew but it was buried in the recesses of my mind, that they are real life brothers. And him and Stevie Ray just went, I believe Stevie Ray went to a tryout, Booker T came with him, and like they just started training and then started work, slowly worked their way up in the business. Like I appreciate that it was not, and again maybe this is because it's A&E, it was not so predicated on the wrestling. Like you could all make a counterpoint that the wrestling is the point and it's nice to get to the wrestling faster, and I would largely agree with that. As you said, in most stories you're usually flipping pages or hitting fast forward waiting for the good stuff, but Booker T's story is unique enough that it warrants the telling, because it does have it's a separate narrative from and then I became a pro wrestler. Like it didn't force that sort of connection there where it's like the only solace I had was watching wrestling. It's like, no, like he was trying to stay alive and get food and shelter and like find love and find peace and calm and like happiness. Like it was not like he just put on Dallas wrestling and Texas wrestling, Houston wrestling, and all of a sudden that got him through the tough times. Like his times were much tougher than that.
Yeah, I think it's important to note the fact, like the things they talked about in this doc, where it's like, listen, this guy got out of jail, he had a parole officer, he needed to prove that he was a stable, rehabilitated person in society. He needed a job in order to get custody of his kid, and he had like a security guard job at a storage unit facility, and then lost it because they did a background check and found out he was in prison. It's like, where they don't do background checks? Wrestling. Like, yes. but my point of bringing that up is like, if he didn't make it as a wrestler, I don't know how many other careers this guy would have had that would have netted him as much success and fame as being a wrestler would have, because this guy, he went to jail, and a lot of people would not have forgiven that or looked beyond it. But wrestling's different.
But especially back then.
Especially in the late 80s. But, it's just like, it just added stakes. It's like, if he wasn't a wrestler, he might have ended up back in prison. And, recidivism is a thing. And that's kind of just the nature of being an ex-con is that he could have easily been a statistic. And so wrestling was really, truly like an important thing in this guy's life, not just like, I was a kid and I grew up and I watched this thing and it looked cool and I don't know any better because I'm a kid.
Yep.
So different.
And where I think it does tie into the wrestling thing really well is later on in the doc, Booker T talks about, when he came to WWE, and obviously a little more entertainment based than WCW, and certainly in that period of time, it was being a good promo really mattered, having some sort of a character mattered. It was definitely a different sort of thing. And he mentions that in WCW he was all business, and then when he got to WWE he sort of let his guard down a little bit and started becoming more wacky and more fun and cutting better promos, and he was always good at promos, but he sort of became a bigger, more larger than life character. And that makes sense when you hear the full story as a whole. You're like, this guy was just putting his head down again and doing very well and great at his job and certainly achieved singles fame and his stardom in his own right in WCW, but I'm not surprised that he was more of a serious man in his WCW run. He was coming off a very tough upbringing, and I could see how he's like did not want to, maybe was not feeling particularly jovial, or like didn't want to play a character that was like a fun, cool guy. Like it was not that he's playing a dead serious character, but it was just a different sort of vibe, And so that's the kind of background that it's nice to hear, because it sort of it like again explains the full story of Booker T. So when he does get that stability and that and sort of makes his mark in WWE, you get why maybe then he was allowed to let the entertainment side flow, and fortunately was very, very good at that, and then sort of off to the races as a longtime legend.
I will say, seeing some of those early clips of him in his career, it's like, you could tell right away this guy had it, and B, like, he was pretty magnetic pretty quickly. Like the Dallas, like the clips they chose from the Dallas wrestling or Houston, I can't remember which one.
Texas wrestling.
We'll say wrestling in Texas.
A big city in Texas wrestling.
Yes. This guy was like so good, but and like, you juxtapose that with a lot of Harlem Heat stuff. There wasn't that much of a difference. Like, this guy was really bombastic and boisterous, and like, he had something to say and he said it loudly, but he also said it like with attitude. Like he just like really mastered the art of wrestling pretty early, from what I could tell. I mean, maybe there's some really bad clips that they hid, and maybe I'm just like completely ignorant to like this whole part of this guy's career that was like terrible. But like, I didn't see a whole lot of difference from 1989, 1990 Booker T and like 1997 Booker T. And that's good.
Especially standing there next to Stevie Ray too. Like, you can, if it was just him by himself, it's harder to gauge, like, well, is this guy really good, or is he just, having a good night, or is he just a little bang, like, but Stevie Ray is just, a blank wall. Like,
right.
As good as he was as the foil for Booker T and like the other half, and, a lot of good tag teams, you need a big oaf, and you have a guy who does cool kicks and jumps and stuff. So they played off each other very well, but Booker T was the one, when you see him, like you said, even as a young man who was not well learned in his craft, is just oozing something. He has an aura about him. He has a magnetism that is just undeniable. And so that, as he refined that and sort of honed that craft and made it better, you can just, it's no surprise that he went on to be really, really good at this. Like, he had the athleticism, and he had the look, and he had the gift of gab. He was great on the mic. He had the personality. Like, it's not at all a shock that he became really, really great at wrestling.
And also seeing the seeds of him physically. Like, a lot of the clips they showed, he's doing a lot of the same moves that he was doing throughout his run in WCW, like spin a Rooney. He was doing the axe kick. He was doing like the Harlem Hangover.
And they're great moves, because they look really good, but they're not incredibly risky. It's not jumping for the sake of jumping. Like, they're high spots, but they're relatively controlled and reasonable. So, which was probably really good for his long-term health.
Well, it's just surprising. This guy was like, we talk about Stevie Ray being like the muscle of the group. Like, Booker T is a huge person, like, and doing flips and kicks and spinning and dance. It's like, this guy was like such a physical specimen, like, and he's in there and he can look tall and big with like heavyweights. So, let's not dismiss that part of it too, where it's like this guy doing a front flip off the top rope. It's like, he's not a small guy.
No, he's like, what they say, 6'3", 250, something like that, maybe probably even bigger. So
right.
Yeah, he was huge. You're right. He really could do both, which is huge for his career. Looking back at the Booker T story, and in 2022, we really got lucky that he rose to the top. Like, it's just, like, for all the reasons now that he's great and the Hall of Famer and a legend, it's so obvious. Like, how could you possibly keep this guy down? But for a black man in the 90s, coming off a tag team, there was just no guarantee that he was ever going to be a star, like, especially in that WCW era where they really didn't allow a lot of other guys to rise, there was such an established main event field, and it was old legends who'd been around forever, and then there's the occasional person they could not help but break through, like a Goldberg or even a DDP. But it was just a very sort of set field, and like Booker T, I think just by dint of being so good at wrestling and such a presence, it didn't. I'm not. He obviously became a main eventer for reals once a lot of those guys dissipated, they're sort of faded out or got incredibly boring. But still, the fact that he even made that run at all is very impressive. Like there's just guys like him again, especially unfortunately been a lot of black wrestlers who don't get to make that leap, don't get to become world champion, let alone 5 times, because like I'm thinking of Bobby Lashley, even a very different type of wrestler, but someone who took a very long time to make that full leap to the very top. Not necessarily because he's black, but certainly just it was always like, why didn't this guy put it together? Why didn't everyone jumped on him? Why didn't he become this big star? And again, not apples to apples, but still, like the fact that Booker T 20 years ago made that leap is really just a testament to how good he was.
Yeah, I mean, you could see it too. I mean, like, even as a tag team act, like, there's 2 things that became very clear after watching this. Not that it wasn't clear to me before, but like I was reminded. The Harlem Heat had the best damn theme song.
Oh my God, it's still around to this day. Like, when does that ever happen? Like, when does a tag team theme become like a singles theme and stay beloved? And like, it's perfect.
Yeah, and B, his ability, like the whole like breaking the fourth wall and talking at the camera was like such a like in your face, like visceral thing that like, yeah, I mean that set him apart from everybody else. That one small thing. So I think other wrestlers kind of started doing that too afterwards, but like I feel like he was the first to really like ham up the camera and like just like talk at the audience at home.
Yeah, especially in that WCW era. That was not what any of those guys were doing. Like that was pretty straightforward wrestling. Like then even NWO was cool, but they were just if you were a mid card guy or a tag team, like you didn't do that kind of stuff. You went out there and did your thing. And Harlem Heat already I guess one of my questions to you that I wanted to ask while we did this is, where do you sort of rank Harlem Heat as a tag team in the pantheon? Like I think they're in the conversation, but I have my thoughts, but I'm curious where, especially after watching this, where do you think they sort of belong?
It's hard to really. It's funny. I had a similar question I was going to pose to you about Booker T in general, but
I have so many like questions. Yeah. I think this episode has made me think about a lot of question themes.
I think you have to contextualize it in the sense that like they were like a top 4 tag team in WCW during a time when there was 2 major promotions. Are they better than the Nasty Boys? I mean, as wrestlers, I believe they are. Are they more iconic? I don't know. To me, I kind of lump them together. I feel like they were kind of the same level. They're not as big as the Steiners, but I'm just trying to think of other like mid to late 90s WCW tag teams.
The Nasty Boys, now that you mentioned it, that's a pretty good comparison because I mean, I don't like the Nasty Boys at all, but you can't deny that they had a look and a character and sort of like a whole aura about themselves. Like they weren't. It wasn't even about a Nasty Boys match is like disgusting to watch. Like, why would you ever want to watch the Nasty Boys wrestle? But just them as people in the promotion, like they just sort of had something about them where you cared about them, and or at least like took note of them and that they were around for their personalities, not and for their look and their feel, not for their matches. Harlem Heat certainly better wrestlers, like you said, but I think a similar style in that they just their presentation was so good that like it almost didn't matter that they had good matches with the Outsiders or with the Steiners, because you're just like, well, these guys just look and feel so cool that I'll never sort of forget them. And their matches, like none of them particularly stick out as I'm sure there are some that hardcore WCW fans love, but to me it was just like they were already made just because they had such a swagger when they came out.
Yeah, and I also think that they're elevated. They were a top tag team. I'm not trying to say they weren't a top tag team in WCW, because they were. I mean, like they were either like fighting for the titles or like a step or 2 away from fighting for the tag team titles. I think with the power of hindsight, knowing that Booker T became a prominent single star, and that is the thing that launched, like, that is the vehicle that launched him, it becomes more important than the Nasty Boys. But ultimately, like, when you really put yourself in 1996, they were like in the mix. They weren't really like, they weren't above or below anyone else in that division, I guess.
Yeah, it was definitely like Outsiders 1, Steiners 2, probably Harlem Heat 3, but like you said, Nasty Boys are right around there. Like then the mid card tag teams all sort of slot in as you can move them around to your heart's content.
American Males,
American Males, Public Enemy, even to a certain extent. Like,
right.
All those WCW teams definitely sort of run together around that point.
Public Enemy, yeah.
But like you said, the theme is really what sticks with everybody, as it should, and they make mention of it in the doc. And one of the things that I love about the theme is there was this weird run, probably in the 2000s, you might be able to pinpoint this better than I can, where they started adding quotes to music, and like obviously Rock's music has Rock talking, and like I feel like there was just, they added lyrics to Austin, they Austin's theme had lyrics, like they had lyrics, or they would add quotes, or they would just, and obviously it's great for like they had to Burn It Down to Seth's theme, like they love doing that over the course of all years, I guess. They just love adding a hook, a catchy, like a catchphrase, or like I said, lyrics, something like that to sort of change the song up for some reason. And Booker T's theme is one of the few I can think of where the Can You Dig It Sucka, it was already a 99 out of 100, and that's somehow made it even better. Like you think that's going to ruin a perfect theme song, and you're like, that's even better because now you even know Booker T's coming out, which is the coolest part.
Wait, oh wow, yeah, you guess you're right. Was that a WWE-ism?
I mean, I guess maybe it was late era WCW, but I don't remember that at all. Like to me, it was a 100% WWE thing. Correct me if I'm wrong. There could be some hardcore Ruthless Aggression fans who know that Booker T era better than I do. But it seems like a Vince thing, doesn't it? Like
it seems like it, but I thought but like WCW was not without lyrics in their songs in the 90s, like American Males. I've recently listened, I'm really fixated on the American Males. Like it was like an entire like song,
but it didn't. But I think they didn't lean so much on the theme song hits, opening note type thing. That to me feels more like a Jim Johnson WWE thing.
What about like the original like Man Called Sting? And
and Hogan's WCW theme.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Hogan theme.
Well, regardless, I think if our listeners know that I'm wrong, please tweet at us at AwesomeTruthPod and tell me that I'm wrong. Regardless of when it was added, I know it originally was just the great theme, and then they yes, no, dana, and then they definitely put the quote at the top, which I think I think the quote is a Vince quote, and I don't think he was saying "Can you dig it, sucka" in WCW, was he?
I thought he was. I thought
maybe he was.
I thought he was. He said stuff like that in his. Maybe not that exact phrase, but he was talking like that in his promos.
Yeah, it's possible.
Pretty consistent.
Regardless, adding it to I'm just surprised that I didn't think such a good theme could get better. And I will say that theme is tied to one of my favorite moments in live wrestling attendance. I was at the 2011 Royal Rumble. I was in Boston. I was living in Boston at the time. That was Walt, as you might remember, the 40-man Royal Rumble, biggest Royal Rumble of all time, until the greatest Royal Rumble, I guess, is now sadly the biggest Royal Rumble of all time. But it was back in the day where like there was obviously wrestling internet, but like I wasn't watching wrestling a ton. I wasn't keeping track of anything. I went because it was in Boston and I got tickets for cheap, and we were having beers, and it's the Rumble. Like, why would you not want to go to the Rumble?
You don't have to justify it. This is a wrestling podcast. I mean, I'm not going to judge you for this.
I'm just setting the tone for why I think this was so exciting. I didn't know what was going to happen. Like I truly was uninformed. I was like, I'm going to go. I think I honestly probably knew 15 of the guys in the match. Like in the card, it's as you expect for a 40-man Rumble. It's Tyler Rex was in there. It was when Punk was in charge of the Nexus, so it was like all the Nexus guys. Like it was not the most inspiring 40 men. But Booker T came out and did not. It was a surprise return. Had been gone for a little bit of time, and that's one of the biggest pops I've ever heard in my entire life. Because like everyone, because his theme just rules. Like I think it was as excited as we were to see Booker T. We were also just like, this theme is like. I think everyone was just physically responding to how good a song it is and how fun it is to get excited for. Like it was just and we were pumped to see a great wrestler, but I think the whole experience was just so memorable. Just the whole Booker T package really encapsulated why it was just so fun to cheer for the guy.
He also came out with like the Predator dreads, if I remember correctly.
He was still real big too. Like he was wide as hell, and he
looking like $1 million. Yeah,
he looked great.
And then he just does one spinneroonie and just like, all right, this guy's so.
I think he like tossed Otunga and like all those scrubs and Mason Ryan, all those guys.
Yeah. Oh, wow, Mason Ryan. That's a time and a place. But speaking of singles run, and specifically WWE, because we could talk about the best of 7 series for I think it was the U.S. title.
They sure didn't. We could talk about it.
Well, there's not much. I don't know what else is there to say other than it was pretty great. We cannot really talk about it, and they did a seven match series with Benoit for the chance to fight for the U.S. title, I believe.
Oh,
I don't think it wasn't even for the title.
Who was the U.S. champion at that point? Do you remember?
I believe it was Disco, but don't hold me to that. I wish they covered it just to refresh my memory. It was pretty.
That's embarrassing enough if Disco was the U.S. I'm gonna look this up. Please talk about this. I'm gonna let you know. Oh no, it was for the TV title.
TV title.
There was one. They did it again. Interesting.
Did they?
I can't tell if it was for the title or the right to face. You might be right. Yeah, to become the number 1 contender. And that makes sense. Disco is the TV champ. Makes way more sense that Disco is the U.S. champ.
But it was for the privilege to fight.
Yes.
Disco Inferno.
At the Great American Bash, Booker T won 4-3 in Baltimore, Maryland to become the number 1 contender to the WCW TV title.
Wow.
Talk about elevating the shittiest, lowest stakes program to something that we all talk about still.
Yeah, I mean that program really made both of those guys. I mean, but then it took both of them many years later to then, become actual champion, not television champion. But also too, he always touts that he's 5-time WCW champion. I remember the one where he became champion because Hogan, Russo, Jeff Jarrett nonsense,
which they cover in the doc.
They do, and then also the last Nitro. So that's 2. He won 3 more times. All right. I mean, sure, I believe it, but it doesn't sound very memorable. It just sounds like a number to me because it's Vince Russo booking, if you're champion once and 6 months later you've won the title 10 more times, it's okay.
That 100% was what it had to be, right? I'm not going to look that up, but I think we can both safely assume that's the which good for him now that he gets to say 5 times. But yeah, I don't recall it. And if there had been more memorable wins, I assume we would have seen them in this documentary. So.
Right, I don't believe they were memorable. But in any case, so that more or less sums up. I mean, unless you have any other further follow-up about Booker T's WCW run, which I guarantee you both of us did not watch those.
No. The best of 7 is honestly probably my final memory of Booker T and WCW. I think I was out pretty soon after that.
Yeah, same. But then let's talk about the WWE run that seemed a little bit more substantial. Many more eyeballs on it. Love the iconic shopping or the grocery store brawl. I still today that is one of the most iconic things, right?
Especially the way they present it. I appreciate it. They showed that, and they didn't force these two things together in the doc. They talk about how when Booker came on the first time, he inadvertently hurt Austin, during the invasion angle. And then they go, and then Austin, in hindsight now says, no big deal, but at the time I was pissed. And then they also talk about the grocery store thing, which is so great. And they don't make it seem like, I think an easy thing for documentaries to do is draw a direct line between the two, But in reality, they were years apart and have nothing to do with each other. And I'm sure Booker had more than proven himself by then. And they sort of just explained them as 2 incidents that occurred over the course of a 15-year WWE run, and I appreciated that. It's not like he earned Austin's respect in the grocery store. It was a fun thing that 2 wrestlers did to kill 15 minutes on a Raw.
Yeah, they definitely skated over a few years of his WWE run there, where it's I have very specific memories of these things. First, was his feud with Austin, which I didn't realize he messed up Austin so badly, and that. That was a really big angle for him that I feel kind of just went nowhere, especially because that was then the NWO came shortly thereafter. And then Booker T almost became part of the NWO and Goldust was kind of trying to save him. And then they turned. It was such a mess.
That was the post Hogan NWO where they were sort of flailing about, right?
Yeah. The one that was so
with Michaels and Big Show and.
Yeah. It was the one that was so loose that it broke up after Nash tore his quad. It was not meant to be. And then he had the run with Triple H that was supposed to be his big moment and ended up obviously not coming to fruition. So I feel like that was like that kind of sums up his first few years of WWE for the most part.
It's shame that they didn't mention the Booker T H match at Mania, because they don't mention WrestleMania at all, and I don't think of Booker T as a guy with a ton of WrestleMania moments anyway. For whatever reason, I just guess that wasn't really his lot. He never really had another big feud, certainly wasn't really in the title picture a lot, as evidenced by 0-time WWF champion. Like, he didn't ever WWE champion. He didn't ever win the belt there. But the H match was huge, and it's been covered to death a million other places. It's a very shitty situation. And I guess that's why they don't cover it, because they're not proud of it. And you can have many long conversations that we probably won't have about the racism element, just the fact that he was a black challenger for the title and they just buried him so cleanly. Like, there's a whole bunch to unpack there. But regardless of all that, I think it's just bad storytelling. Like, whenever it would be like if Kofi lost at, bad example, like Kofi's black. I don't mean to do it for that. I just mean, like, if you have the underdog who's striving against a sort of unbeatable challenger, a guy with great pedigree, who is, again, not a pun there, just a guy who's on top of the world, and then you just have him lose the match at Mania, you're just like, why would you ever do that? Like, that's just, even if you have him lose the next month, back the belt, like, just have the underdog win at Mania. It's what everybody wants to see. Like, the fact they didn't do that is still pretty perplexing.
Well, I don't think that's a bad comparison, mostly because you see Kofi in the doc saying, if not for the success of Booker T, I would not have felt like I could do this the way I did. And same with Big E, and like, I think if they position it differently, the Triple H Booker T match, I can't remember what WrestleMania it was, 2000.
Let's see if you can get it here. You're very good at this.
2003?
I don't know what number it was. It was at, do you know what number Mania was?
19.
That's right. Wow.
Okay, so it was the one with whatever.
Great job.
Point being is, if they position that differently, that could have been Kofi Mania, only with Booker T Mania.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a shame. It's like I was just taking race out of the picture and saying it was just objectively bad. If you bring race into the picture and just the inspirational element and just all that, like, it could have been even more. And they just made it. They leaned into that, as I remember it, to a certain extent, and then just had him lose. And
they were the one who brought race into it in the first place.
Yeah, they could have ignored the racial element as well. They chose not to.
Triple H did that with his promos.
Yeah.
Like, okay, what? But anyway.
And maybe there's a world where H wanted to drop the belt, and H thought that he would get heat, and then Vince, a week before says, H wins. Like, I don't know I imagine the fault is on Vince because of mercurial booking and weird Vince bullshit. Whatever the backstory.
I can't argue that.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's accurate, it's hard to really say. But,
that's the easy fallback, right? The option is to say, Vince probably fucked it up along the way.
You won't hear contention from me on that thought. But, but all of that is to say, I guess we should also bring up the King Booker era, which I don't know what the hell was going on Friday nights back then, but I guess that was a thing, and he seems to look back on it fondly. And he did, to his credit, he did win the world title or the heavyweight title a few times.
Oh, did he really?
Yes.
Okay, does he count that as a WCW champion, or was that after the 5-time?
It was after 5-time.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's great. I didn't know that.
Or maybe I'm wrong.
He is. No, let's look it up. How many champions is he? Okay, Booker T is a 6-time world champion. He won the World Heavyweight Championship once.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because, like, he was kind of like the pre-JBL SmackDown heel.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
that's pretty good.
That was the thing.
I mean, the King Booker thing is great to me because it's a trope they fall back on. And certainly they've done it a lot recently. They gave Xavier Woods a King run. They gave Baron Corbin a King run. Wade Barrett got a King run. And usually it's so stupid and lazy. But occasionally there's gold, and obviously Macho King is the best King, I think, irrefutably, right? There's just no beating Macho King.
No, I mean, there's. I think
But is he the second best king ever? Is
I
Owen
mean, what
Hart
about
better
Jerry
than
the
Macho
King?
than King Booker?
What about Jerry the King?
Yeah, but I mean, did he ever win King of the Ring?
No, but it's
Yeah, well, I
oh
mean kings who have earned their crown through winning the prestigious tournament.
oh I see what you're saying.
Like Harley Race was a king for a while, I think.
I had to look up the fact that Booker T won the King of the Ring.
Yeah,
I
I was
just
going
doing
through
a
the
king
list
gimmick.
before we started talking to see all the kings. It's a pretty bad list. Like in the late '90s, people just won, and that just didn't mean anything. They're like, you won, and that's it. Like Austin never wore a crown.
No, I mean, he was like the first person to really like defy the king gimmick. He's like, oh, this is bullshit. To his credit. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I won't even bother ranking kings. King Mabel,
but he did a really King Mabel's on the list. He's got to be. They let him be. I mean, that he got a title shot after that, so he's on the short list, sadly. But
yeah.
Booker, though, like he clearly he was at a stage in his career by that point where I feel like they just anything. I think he basically says this in the doc. They gave him something to do and he ran with it and made it silly and fun and interesting, you know. And King Booker was stupid, but he got to work with his wife and they got action figures and they had a whole great run. Like, and people still talk about it. Like that's really all you can ask for something that dumb, I think, or that simple, is to give it a little bit of oomph and make it memorable. And like he seemed really, really good at that sort of thing.
Yeah, the doc definitely did a good job of like being like, hey, this is a thing that he was given, and he made the most of it, and he was ridiculous, and that's kind of what made it kind of like palatable. Like, you know, it just ultimately just this guy's an entertainer. He was given like a weird, stupid, like tired gimmick and made it like decent. And I think that kind of ties into his run in WWE, where it's like, you know, we talk about like his highs and lows, but ultimately like, this guy was given like a platform to be an entertainer. And I mean, I think he was extremely entertaining and was very memorable. And, you know, he made the Spinning Rudy the most over thing in wrestling for like at least a year. Like, so, and I think that ultimately is what's worth really noting and exploring. And sure, he was the king for a little bit. And it brought Charmel into the picture too, which I guess they needed the king gimmick to bring in a female ballet.
Yeah, he needed the queen.
Sure.
And she seemed really appreciative, and they both seemed lovely, and, you know, like they seem very in love still in the doc. Like, I know it's a film documentary, but it seems like they have a very stable, lovely life and seem like nice people, you know. And I think like Booker's career is great to me because, again, he had those title runs, so you never can say, oh, it sucks they never gave him the belt, or they never gave him, like, again, could they have given him one more with a lot of oomph to it? Yes, but they didn't. But he also had plenty of them, even if they're shitty WCW runs that don't matter. Still had the belt, still great. Still, some of them are memorable for good reasons, good and bad. But he was in an era where, you know, I think we all sort of agree that he was never going to be like a top 3 guy, you know, like he was never going to be a taker. He was never going to be like, and then he came in during the Austin Rock era, which was just they were holding down the fort up top. Then there was Angle, there was Lesnar. Like, he was maybe never as good as those guys, but he's always settled in comfortably underneath them. And he seemed like he was one of those guys who seemed like he was a great, you know, high level mid carder who didn't necessarily push to be higher, but also not because he was lazy or, you know, bored or whatever, or like, you know, just cashing checks. Like, he just was very, it seemed like he was very accepting and understanding of his spot on the card, and like, and already had some heights, and, you know, didn't necessarily need any more. And like, I think that's just really nice. Like, you get so that we've talked about so many guys who never get to the top, and for various substance reasons, too many other guys in their way, all that shit, you know, backstage bullshit. But Booker just seems like a guy who had his moment in the sun and enjoyed it, and otherwise just, you know, was always around doing something kind of fun. And we all loved that, and he loved it, and he had a great run, and like, there's just no regrets, you know? Like, it's nice to hear a wrestling story where you're like, in the end, everyone was pretty happy with how it turned out, and there's just not much else to say.
You mentioned Undertaker, and I have to also note the quick segment they did on how over the Spinneroonie was, where they tried to make the Undertaker do it, and to the point where they brought everybody from the locker room out, including Vince to do their own version, and just for the Undertaker to just uncomfortably stand there. Great stuff.
That was seemingly just kept filming, for no one, for just the records, for like a half hour after the show went off the air.
Right, yeah, this is
And
all
Taker's just openly talking to the camera, like it's all just like it does. If you were at that Raw, you're probably like, wow, I got so lucky with this great Raw I went to.
Yeah. Never before, never again will you see that kind of non-wrestling content that was better than wrestling. But so I guess my question for you is based after that, the assessment of his career is overrated or underrated, Booker T?
Again, I think he's very accurately rated. Like, I think he's, one of the best black wrestlers of his generation, and I think one of the best mid-carders of the 90s and the 2000s. Like, and I think that he, with the occasional bump up higher, and I think he maybe could have been a little more, but but again, he doesn't seem to really mind, and that makes me like, he doesn't seem to hold grudges or have any sort of regrets, and I appreciate that. Like, I just think everyone seemed very happy with his situation, and so I would call him rated. I would say he is very properly rated. Certainly deserves the Hall of Fame, deserves to be loved, and if they'd done more with him, that would have been great. But it's okay they didn't.
Yeah, I would say
concur.
I would concur with that. I mean, I think that it also comes down to timing too, where this guy was at his peak and came to WWE at the same time that Rock and Austin and Triple H and Jericho, and then Michaels returning, like Undertaker was still around, like Brock and Angle. Like, that's a tough list to really rise to the top. I mean, like, you could point to a few moments to be like, wow, that could have been Booker T's like crowning achievement. And he did have those in certain instances, but like, yeah, I don't think anyone's ever going to look back on Booker T and say what could have been. I think he did a lot of great things that no one will ever say like doesn't make him an elite like wrestling legend.
And they hinted at this in the doc. Austin, I think, says it out loud at a certain point, but he was one of the rare WCW guys who came over and thrived and has a job for life, like a couple guys like Goldberg, had a little run there and comes back as an attraction, and maybe a few other guys stuck for a few years, but he was one of the few guys who became a WWF guy, a WWE guy at that point. And like, you could tell Vince did not want many of those guys. The other wrestlers did not want many of those guys. Like, there was a built-in antipathy and hate for a lot of those guys coming over. They're going to take our jobs, they're going to take our spots, they're going to take our, like, there was just a big wall they put up, and Booker T broke down that wall and thrived, and like, that alone is an accomplishment. Like, I think all the forces would have aligned to get him out of that job, and hurting Austin could have been the icing on the cake, and instead he had a great run. Like, it was just, he could have lost his job, and instead he is permanently employed, and I think that is a testament to how good he was and how much they couldn't resist keeping him on the card and giving him jobs and putting him out there in front of the fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was a perfect balance of athletic, in-ring, talented wrestler, and like super entertaining WWE attitude, ruthless aggression era Vince guy. Like, I think he balanced those two things very well for his career, and that's why we still talk about it. That's why he's worth A&E saying, hey, out of all the 130 hours we have, let's dedicate 2 of them to Booker T. It's like, let's do it. That sounds great.
I will say, I don't know how you watch this, but I've streamed it on Xfinity, my parents' Xfinity account, and
sure.
It was an hour and a half with commercials, and I will say that's very long. Like, they didn't. One thing I do appreciate about the network is they try and keep things under an hour. Like, that's quite a long wrestling documentary, but worth watching just for being a breath of fresh air about a guy we don't know a ton about, hear a ton about, and isn't covered as much as he should be. Just getting the backstory and reliving his great moments was worth the time. Yeah,
I mean, again, like we said at the beginning, he's an interesting story to tell, and reliving most of his great moments in the ring and his career were also worth watching. So positive.
Yeah, it's a treat, I'd say.
Positive. Yeah, I was about to ask.
And especially if you're going through like, well, I want to watch WWE Legends, episodes, but I don't want to watch Taker and Goldberg. It's like, well, travel back in time and watch Booker T. It's, if you want something slightly fresh, slightly that you haven't heard 100 times before, I think they have that for you right there. So there you go. If you are hungry for A&E content, you probably shouldn't be, but if you are nonetheless, and you're a wrestling fan and a completist who just needs to watch things, you got Booker T out there. You could do much worse. So go enjoy that on A&E. And of course, you can find our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are delivered. We are there. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, great to talk Booker T with you. What a guy. And again, that theme song, we should probably do a top theme song countdown at some point, but it would be really hard to not put Harlem Heat / Booker T in the top 5 even.
It's easily top 10.
No, let's
top 10.
Let's bat that around. We should do a secret ballot at some point and see if we have any crossover. But add it to the list of future episodes.
Great. We need more content.
Yeah, I don't want to watch a bunch of 150 hours of A&E necessarily, so it may be better than that.
Anything to prevent that.
Thank you all so much for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.